Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And my name is Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed video of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will once Chris Mellon kicks in the door at AARO and takes over their Twitter account.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely, but even if it's new science and not aliens, woo!
It's a very exciting time.
And a quick reminder before we get into it, you can find our show notes at veryexcitingtime.com or support us by going to patreon.com/veryexcitingtime, where you can also find extra content like the Q&A video that we just recorded.
So, Chuck, I messed it up. I
Scott?
didn't do my thing. I didn't say, all right.
Well, all right.
There's a shirt we should have. All right.
All right.
Everyone
Yeah,
just
I
think of
love
the
it.
Matthew McConaughey thing. All right, all right,
Uh-huh.
all right.
We did talk a little bit about swag recently, and there's
did.
some good stuff in there.
Yeah,
There's
see.
also
We'll see.
some real questionable ones.
Yeah, Chuck's not so sure that a hashtag UFO daddy shirt is a good idea. I think it would be our number one seller.
You didn't have the hashtag on there. It was just UFO daddy.
Do you
Like,
think the hashtag is what makes it safe for work?
I mean, I don't know. Just maybe.
All right. Let us know in the comments when you buy a UFO daddy shirt.
Okay. Great.
We'll put
Leave
it to the people.
Leave all the critical decisions up to the YouTube comment section and the Patreon comment section.
Yeah.
I see no problem with this.
No, serious story though. I think
Actually,
what we were thinking about doing was 2 t-shirts to begin with, one that says UFO nerd and one that says tolerant friend.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Once I thought of that, I was
Pretty
like,
good.
that's so dumb. Of course that's what we make, and then we can wear them.
Yeah, right?
We'll sell
like
one
thing
copy
one
of
and-
each.
Yeah, thing 1 and thing 2. Yeah.
All right, Chuck.
Cool.
We are
All
here
right.
today because AARO, after a year of teasing us, has finally released their historical record of U.S. government involvement in UFO programs and stuff. We've been waiting.
yeah.
We've been waiting. Sean Kirkpatrick has since quit AARO. And even after he quit, he was like, my last job is to wrap up this historical report. And we're like, oh, man, they've been working on it for a while. This thing is going to be great. So I want to take you back in time a little bit.
Wait, can I guess what's in the report?
You can try, sure.
Just for our audience's sake, I have not read any of the notes that Scott prepared today. So I'm going in completely blind here. I'm going to guess that there is absolutely nothing in the historical report, and possibly, like we teased a little while ago that based on the number of like months that were covered by each report, that they were either going to cover like 1 month or they might go negative. So my theory is they're going to recover or like rehash a whole bunch of old stuff that they've already talked about. Yeah.
Very exciting. We'll find out. So let's rewind a little bit to before the report was released. So on March 5th, Chris Sharp from Liberation Times confirmed that AARO would be holding a media briefing the next day, restricted to hand-picked reporters. Defense Scoop later wrote, despite repeatedly reiterating commitments to the public transparency regarding AARO's findings, the media engagement was invite only, and Pentagon press officials limited attendance to only those invitees.
Invite only. So I'm sure they got all the famous people who cover UFO stuff, like Ross Coulthart, Leslie Kane.
Sure, yeah. You sweet summer child. No, they didn't invite anyone.
Of course not.
On March 7th, Ross Coulthart tweeted, multiple sources are telling me that the AARO UAP report given to select journalists in an embargoed briefing is coming out tomorrow, and it will be an absolutely unequivocal rejection of a non-human intelligence presence or that the U.S. has a retrieval craft. This is intended to shut down UAP commentary for good.
Oh no, spoilers.
Yeah, I should point out, Ross was big mad that he wasn't invited because he has been like the big UFO visible reporter over at News Nation. They have been covering this topic nonstop. Like, we're joking, like, of course they wouldn't invite the UFO friendly reporters, but honestly, it is kind of a, like a middle finger to like take the one big reporter who's been covering it consistently and not invite them.
Like, who did they invite? That's what I don't. Is it
just the mainstream news media? Like the guy at the New York Times who just parrots everything that the Pentagon tells him. Anyway, on March 8th, AARO tweeted for the first time in 2 years. This was their third ever tweet with a link to the first volume of their report. That link goes to a DoD link shortener, and for me at least, it never loads.
Yeah. Okay. Well, link shorteners are hard, right?
Sure. On March 15th, they tweeted again saying, our historical work continues, and they invited witnesses to come forward, and they included a link to aaro.mil, which is a 404.
I mean, regular links are hard too. I'm like,
sure. And then on March 16th, which as of our recording is yesterday, they replied to that tweet with a corrected link to www.aaro.mil, which is their actual website.
Of course it is. And they can't handle www redirects.
Right.
I mean, I guess DNS is harder than regular links, but I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
So the report, full title, The Report on Historical Record of U.S. Government Involvement with UAP, Volume 1, is a sweet 63 pages, of which almost 2/3 are actual content.
So, okay, that's like progress in some ways.
23 pages dedicated to the table of contents and the references section.
Double spaced. Very, very wide margins.
I'll skip to the end here for you and read the conclusion. To date, AARO has not discovered any empirical evidence that any sighting of a UAP represented off-world technology or the existence of a classified program that had not been properly reported to Congress. Investigative efforts determined that most sightings were the result of misidentification of ordinary objects and phenomena, and although many UAP reports remain unsolved, AARO assesses that if additional quality data were available, most of these cases could also be identified and resolved as ordinary objects or phenomena.
Yeah, unsurprising. What I want to know though, did they find any evidence of a sighting of a UAP that represented on-world technology or like different timeline technology?
You're picking up on the weasel words here. Yeah. So as usual, they limit their claims to extraterrestrial or off-world.
Yeah.
Some of the theories is that these things are not off-world or extraterrestrial. However, when someone questions Susan Goff, like, hey, what does extraterrestrial mean? She says it means not of this world, which like, yes, that's what the word literally means, Susan. Anyway. So
she's a very skilled weasel.
I want to quote some of these parts of the report because there's some stuff in here that's worth talking about. But as you may have gotten from the conclusion just there, it gets a bit verbose. So, Chuck, do you read Daring Fireball, the Apple weblog?
Okay, no, I used to, but
he does a shtick where he takes like a press release from a company and translates it to plain English. And, it's always like, Epic Store holds that Apple, is restraining them for business. And the translation is always like, I am high as a kite,
Okay.
I guess the alternate thing to think of was on Key and Peele, they had Obama's anger translator who would take everything Obama said, translate it. I want us to try doing that today. Chuck, do you mind?
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
I've written little translations here. So let's have you read those.
Okay, great.
So first of all, AARO found no evidence that any U.S. government investigation, academic-sponsored research, or official review panel has confirmed that any sighting of a UAP represented extraterrestrial technology. All investigative efforts at all levels of classification concluded that most sightings were ordinary objects and phenomena and the result of misidentification.
Translation. Most reports were wrong, and none of them were confirmed aliens, so we're discounting all of them.
AARO assessed that some portion of sightings since the 1940s have represented misidentification of never-before-seen experimental and operational space, rocket, and air systems, including stealth technologies and the proliferation of drone platforms.
Translation. It wasn't a UFO. It was a secret spy plane. Just trust us.
AARO found no empirical evidence for claims that the U.S. government and private companies have been reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. AARO determined, based on all information provided to date, that claims involving specific people, known locations, technological tests, and documents allegedly involved in or related to the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology are inaccurate.
Translation. We looked real hard for an illegally hidden UFO program, you guys, but everyone we asked said it didn't exist, so we stopped.
I want to be clear. That last part, that's not a joke. Kirkpatrick has stated this in interviews. He's literally said that they would find out that, a program was supposed to be a cover for a UFO thing.
Right.
And he would go to the head of the project and then ask, hey, do you work with UFOs? And they would say, no, Sean, we don't. And he would just accept that and move on.
Yeah.
Case closed. And as we know as we know for the Wilson Davis memo, unless you're on that need to know list, they have to lie to you. The whole point here, the claim is it's an illegally hidden program. They're not just going to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. I just imagine Kirkpatrick rolling up to some warehouse somewhere and there's a tarp floating somewhere. And he's like, hey, what's under that tarp? They're like, it's soil. Kirkpatrick's like, yeah, all right, sure, let's go.
Checks out.
I think we're done here.
Right. They included a rather long list of various claims that they've looked into, which, if you're a member of the community, is kind of fun to go through because you're like, oh, that's that guy, and that's that guy, and that's that guy, and I know what this one is. But here's just a few of the ones that they say they looked into. UAP Non-Disclosure Agreements, or NDA. AARO has found no evidence of any authentic UAP-related NDA or other evidence threatening death or violence for disclosing UAP information.
Translation. No one who was threatened made a recording of the threat, so no threats were made. Case closed.
A CIA official allegedly managed UAP experimentation. The named former CIA official was not involved in the movement of extraterrestrial technology. The same former CIA officer signed a memo rejecting a claim made by interviewees that he managed the movement of and experimentation on off-world technology.
Translation. The guy signed a memo saying he didn't do it. Case closed.
Named companies allegedly experimenting on alien technology. AARO has found no evidence that U.S. companies ever possessed off-world technology. The executives, scientists, and chief technology officers of the companies named by interviewees met with the director of AARO and denied on the record that they have ever recovered, possessed, or engaged in reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology.
Translation. We asked the CEO, and he said he's never seen a UFO. Case closed.
So yeah,
they're change my voice every time.
They're taking their job real seriously, as you can tell.
Yeah, seriously.
Now, it's worth noting there are a few big ticket claims that we were all hoping AARO would look into. For example, there have been many reports over the years of UFOs over nuclear sites, including nuclear arms officers reporting UFOs deactivating missiles, activating missiles, shooting missiles down. They just don't, they mention it, but they say they'll cover it in volume 2. They also at no point mention the 2004 Nimitz Tic Tac event or the 2015 Roosevelt event, both of which were included in the 2017 New York Times article that kind of brought this whole issue surging back into public awareness.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's part of the hype cycle. You got to save the good stuff for volume 2. You always leave them wanting more.
Always leave them wanting more. Yeah. So yeah, volume 2 is apparently where the bangers are going to be. They're saving the big ticket denials for next year.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, back into official voice. AARO assesses that UAP sightings and reports of these sightings to U.S. government organizations and claims that some UAP constitute extraterrestrial craft and that the U.S. government has secured and is experimenting on extraterrestrial technology have been influenced by a range of cultural, political, and technological factors.
Translation. Y'all been watching too much X-Files.
AARO interviewed approximately 30 people who claimed to have insight into alleged U.S. government involvement in off-world technology exploitation or to possess knowledge of UAP that have allegedly disrupted U.S. nuclear facilities in the past.
Translation. It took us all year, but we talked to 30 of these crazy people.
AARO and DoD assume that individuals convey their accurate recollection of their perception of the events they observed or heard.
Translation. We're not saying they're lying, but,
Some literature suggests individual accounts can be unreliable as they are subject to a person's interpretation of sensory data through the filter of their experiences, beliefs, or state of mind during the event. A person who reports a case might be credible in that they believe the elements of their account to be accurate. However, their reliability, which is their ability to accurately interpret events as well as to recall and convey those events due to a range of factors, is altogether different from their inherent sincerity.
Translation. Now, again, we're not saying they're lying, but,
Similarly, confirmation bias is a recognized subconscious cognitive process whereby a person tends to seek and believe information that supports their hypothesis and to discount information that undermines their hypothesis.
Which is not something that AARO is subject to. But translation. Translation. We're not saying they're lying, but,
Oh my God. Okay, so the rest of the report from that point on is a summary of historical UFO research programs from 1945 through the current day. And this is going to shock you. According to the report, none of those efforts found any evidence of extraterrestrial activity.
Surprising. Wait, so it's 1945 through the current day, and they didn't cover... Why is there volume 2?
That's a very good question. Presumably, it took them all year to get this far. I don't know. Actually, that's a good question. I've never heard them discuss the logic for why it's being broken up into 2 parts. Anyway, but I want to spend a little bit of time discussing some of these historical research programs because what the government says publicly about UFOs and what they say behind closed doors is very different. There's a New York Times article, actually from the 70s. There's a banger quote in it. It says, Despite official pronouncements for decades that UFOs were nothing more than misidentified aerial objects, and as such were no cause for alarm, declassified records indicate that the phenomenon has aroused much serious behind-the-scenes concern in official circles.
God, I would hope so.
Yeah. So there's been this like weird disjointed thing from the US government for almost 80 years now, where like one group will come out and say that they take it very seriously. Another group will come out and say the whole thing is ridiculous, and they kind of teeter-totter back and forth. It almost feels like a factional war inside the government over who gets to care about this and who has the upper hand at any given moment. So conveniently for me, when I sat down to write our notes for this week's episode, our very first episode, which was terrible and we never released it, was a historical review of U.S. government investigations.
Right.
So I had all these notes compiled from, back when we started. So I kind of whipped them back into shape and shortened them up a bit because they were a bit verbose. But yeah, it was really interesting to go back and look at my notes and compare it to what AARO said. Now, I will give AARO credit. They mention every single one of these programs. They don't try to ignore any of them or pretend they don't exist. However, in every single case, they were like, nothing was found. And that is not always accurate. So we're going to rewind time here back to 1947. The very start of this thing is an investigation run by the Army, Air Force, and FBI investigations.
Do we have a rewinding time sound effect?
I think sounds like a question for our editor. Yeah. Go lift that scene out of Wayne's World. Yeah,
exactly.
So in June of 1947, Kenneth Arnold saw a string of 9 shiny, unidentified flying objects going past Mount Rainier at 1,200 miles per hour. This came after regular sightings of Foo Fighters by World War II pilots. And for whatever reason, this event got national press coverage. And it's where we get the term flying saucers from. Funny enough, Kenneth Arnold never described them as flying saucers, so it was something the media put on him. The closest he said is they moved like a saucer skipping on water. He did not describe them as saucer shaped, but the term flying saucers stuck. So this is kind of widely viewed as the start of the modern UFO phenomenon. We've talked about this a little bit before, that picking a start date for the UFO phenomenon is kind of arbitrary, because depending on how you interpret it, there are UFO reports stretching back to ancient time, like depending on what you qualify as a UFO. But most people kind of go from 1947, the summer of the saucers, as when this whole UFO thing kind of got started. So,
quick question though: in the 40s and 50s, did people not skip rocks? Like, were they skipping saucers?
That's a good question. Like, I've never understood that. Yeah, must be a cultural thing. So that was in June. In July, the Army Air Corps intelligence became concerned that UFO sightings might be Russian propaganda. So
always fair,
right? So they requested the FBI's help because, quote, the first reported sightings might have been by individuals of communist sympathies with the view of causing hysteria and fear of a secret Russian weapon.
Yeah, which is totally not a thing we would report right now. But, things were real wild back then.
Yeah. So the Army, Air Force, and the FBI conducted a 3-week investigation into witnesses who reported sightings, including Kenneth Arnold. And they actually became concerned that they might be investigating a secret U.S. weapon. But, quote, high-level reassurances were obtained that this was not so.
So it's like, are you guys sure this isn't ours?
Right. It's so funny because we're still there today, right? Like you still have, all the big guys coming out and going, okay, it's probably not ours. Everybody's telling us it's not ours. Like, yeah, if there was a company in the world, a country in the world who is capable of making a light year advancement in flying technology, it would probably be us, but we don't think it was us. So yeah, at the end of their investigation, they concluded, quote, "This flying saucer situation is not all imaginary or seeing too much in some natural phenomena. Something is really flying around." And then in September, the Air Materiel Command at Wright Field also conducted an investigation, and General Twining concluded, quote, "The phenomenon is something real and not visionary or fictitious."
Shit, that's a big deal. Strong statements from like really material witnesses. That's
absolutely
crazy.
Yeah, like no nonsense. There's unequivocal. This is a real thing. AARO's summary of this investigation just says they, quote, "did not find evidence of extraterrestrial technology," which is not a lot.
What do you even say?
I mean, that is not a fair representation of the conclusion of these investigations.
Yeah. All right.
So General Twining was so concerned that he recommended an official investigation be set up, which led to the newly established Air Force starting Project Sign in 1948. Now,
wait, this started the Air Force?
No, the Air Force started after World War II in 1947. Now, there are conspiracy theorists out there who will tell you, like, so we start finding flying saucers and suddenly we need an Air Force and a CIA. Like, that's pretty suspicious.
Curious.
But if you dig into the history of these, both the Air Force and the CIA were existing groups that were kind of like redefined into official departments. This stuff was in motion for years post World War II. It was more like post World War II, we had a really good insight into how our defense stuff needs to run. And it became clear, like, these two groups needed to be their own thing. We can't just have the Army being the group that flies airplanes.
Yeah, I think we did the same thing with Space Force. It's like,
absolutely,
it just became totally obvious that it needed to be its own group. So,
totally.
That makes sense. Okay.
So yeah, General Twining says we need an actual investigation. The Air Force starts Project Sign. Officially, Sign was inconclusive, but they produced a top secret report called The Estimate of the Situation, which concluded that UFOs were extraterrestrial.
What? So why didn't AARO mention that?
Well, the Air Force Chief of Staff, General Vandenberg, rejected the report due to a lack of physical evidence.
Yeah. All right, I guess.
Right. He then ordered all copies of the document to be burned.
Okay, sure. Because obviously that doesn't give it more. All right, whatever.
Yeah. And all of the staff who backed the extraterrestrial hypothesis were reassigned.
Oh my God. Well, I really thought that was going to end with, also, they were all killed.
I mean, basically, right? So, yeah, news of the destruction order actually leaked back in the 50s and fueled a belief in a government cover-up.
Yeah, no shit.
Now, Project Sign was immediately followed by Project Grudge in 1949.
Yeah, okay, sure. That seems appropriate.
They were not subtle about what this project was for. Vandenberg was pissed. He thought Sign made them look dumb. So yeah, Project Grudge.
Yeah.
After 6 months, Grudge issued a public report which concluded that there was no evidence that UFOs were foreign advanced technology and represented no threat.
Yeah, big surprise.
Right. They blamed reports on misidentifications, mass hysteria, fraud, and mental illness. It recommended that investigation of saucers be reduced in scope. And later, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a scientist who was involved in both Project Sign and Project Grudge, claimed it was, quote, less science and more of a public relations campaign.
Ooh. Yeah. Sounds right. Have we heard the name J. Allen Hynek?
J. Allen Hynek is a legendary figure in the UFO world. We haven't talked about him a lot, but I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard of Hynek. He's one of the kind of like original cadre of dudes. Interestingly, he was well involved in the debunking efforts. We're going to keep talking about him, in fact. But he later recanted, and in the back half of his life, he became a staunch advocate of investigating UFOs and the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Okay.
So in 1951, Project Grudge was reactivated, and in 1952, it was renamed Project Blue Book because several high-ranking Air Force generals were dissatisfied with the quality of the investigations in Project Grudge.
Man, this is like so back and forth. I feel like I'm getting whiplash.
Yeah. The new head of the project, Captain Ruppelt, made changes to streamline the reporting process. He created a standardized questionnaire. He placed a Blue Book officer on every Air Force base. Blue Book staff had broad investigative authority. They were authorized to interview any and all military witnesses, sidestepping the chain of command. And they standardized the usage of the more neutral term UFO, favoring it over the more sensational flying saucer.
That sounds amazing. Like, this had to lead to great results, right?
Obviously. In July of 1952, following a series of high-profile sightings, including a weeks-long string of sightings in Washington, D.C. over the White House, the CIA established a panel of scientists called the Robertson Panel to look into UFOs.
All right, great. Everything's looking up.
The head of Project Blue Book and Dr. Hynek presented all of their best evidence, including video footage, and after 12 hours, the panel concluded that all UFO sightings were explainable.
Wait, all of them?
All of them. The Robertson panel's final report stressed that intelligence channels were overwhelmed with UFO reports, leading to the risk of missing a conventional threat like the Russians. They recommended the Air Force begin debunking and downplaying UFOs to discourage public interest, and suggested monitoring domestic UFO enthusiast organizations.
Wow. I mean, it's interesting to know where this all came from.
Yeah. Now, I want to emphasize this for a little bit, because it's one thing to say some of the government's efforts to investigate UFOs haven't been particularly well done. Okay, that's not really a controversial statement. But saying the US government has spent time debunking and discouraging and stigmatizing the topic is a little more controversial. And I want to be clear, those are not controversial statements. Those are their recommendations coming out of the Robertson panel. They recommended things like working with mass media companies. They recommended getting Walt Disney to help produce films explaining that UFOs are nonsense. When I said they're monitoring UFO enthusiast groups, I'm talking like, Cold War communist sympathizer shit, like treating these people like potential criminals, not just like, hey, see what they're saying. Like, this was some heavy duty shit. Now, there is a little bit of room for disagreement about how many of these recommendations were enacted. And I will grant you, I don't know for sure, but we do know there are confirmed reports that the military has had representatives embedded in every major news organization since the 60s.
Okay.
Is that directly part of this? Is it unrelated? I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like, what I want to emphasize is it's not wild tinfoil hat conspiracy theory shit to say the U.S. government decided that people should not be interested in UFOs, and we were going to put work into ensuring.
Yeah, right. I'm not surprised. So these are like declassified reports and everything.
Yeah, FOIA requests and declassified reports. Yeah. Now, following the Robertson panel, as you might have guessed, Project Blue Book's investigative duties were severely reduced. The new head of the project was overtly uninterested in UFOs, and the Air Force ordered that officers should only discuss UFO incidents if they had a conventional explanation. Publicly, Blue Book was still the official Air Force investigation into UFOs, but privately, they had been converted into a debunking effort.
Yeah, there it is. That makes sense now. A quick question. Why was it called Blue Book?
I don't know that, actually.
Was there a blue book somehow involved in this?
What it makes me think of is those blue exam books that you used in high school and college. And I wonder if they maybe used the same things for taking witness reports, but I genuinely don't know what the source of the name is.
Okay. I'll ask GPT later.
So yeah, that was 1952. Fast forward into the 60s now. Blue Book has been going. They are continuing to investigate, but they are much more of a debunking org. By the 60s, there is growing criticism of Project Blue Book because, frankly, their explanations for UFO reports have become increasingly lazy. There are interviews from J. Allen Hynek talking about how they were under a lot of pressure to find conventional explanations for UFOs, no matter what. Just a few examples here. In 1965, they dismissed a sighting by the Oklahoma Highway Patrol officers. They said they were mistaking Jupiter or Rigel for a UFO, despite the fact that Jupiter and Rigel are in opposite sides of the sky.
Give them options depending on which way they're facing. Makes sense.
It was probably Jupiter or maybe Rigel. Were you north or south? In 1966, Blue Book dismissed Ohio police officers who chased a UFO that moved east, came to a stop, and then went south, saying that they were just following a communication satellite.
Yeah, I mean, satellites change direction all the time. Sometimes come to complete stops. I believe it.
Very commonly reported behavior. Pressured to explain a case involving Michigan police officers in 1966, Dr. Hynek suggested swamp gas as a possible explanation, which caused public outrage.
Yeah, I bet. Is that where that came from?
That is where it came from. When we joke about swamp gas, we're talking about this. Now, I want to give Dr. Hynek just a little bit of credit here. People were pissed, and rightly so. Hynek stressed, if you go back and look at it, he's very clear. This is one possible explanation. Like, hey, in the swamp, sometimes there's gases. Sometimes those gases make weird lights. People can be tricked by that. It's one of several ideas he threw out. But it was so insulting that people were up in arms about it. Dr. Hynek, I should point out, in 1985, shortly before he died, he said, "We had a job to do, whether right or wrong, to keep the public from getting excited."
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Now, in 1966, a congressional hearing by the Armed Services Committee was held following a string of high-profile UFO sightings. The Air Force testimony included blaming sightings on balloons or helicopters or a, quote, flying billboard advertising gasoline. Locals reported Air Force officers confiscating newspapers and telling them not to report what they'd seen.
Wow. Imagine coming up with an explanation so insulting that Congress gets pissed at you.
Right? Yeah. And, it's hard to ignore the parallels between then and now, right? Like now, admittedly, unfortunately, the angry Congress people now are like Tim Burchett, who's a little hard to take seriously, but definitely like we've been here before with the government is so confident in their ability to stigmatize and dismiss this that they just kind of throw out garbage and people just trust that people will lap it up.
Yeah.
Following the congressional hearing, public criticism of Blue Book and accusations of a government cover-up, I bet, the Air Force agreed to select a neutral panel of civilian scientists to review a selection of well-documented UFO sightings.
Surely a carefully selected neutral panel dedicated to uncovering the truth of the matter, I'm sure.
Yeah, obviously. In summer of 1966, they chose physicist Edward Condon from the University of Colorado as the director. The Condon Committee started an 18-month study, which was immediately plunged into controversy.
Yeah, of course it was.
a memo leaked from the assistant dean of the university's graduate program, reassuring administrators who were like, what do you mean we're investigating UFOs? Reassuring them that the study would find no reality to the observations.
It's a called shot,
Yeah. Condon himself said that he thought the subject was nonsense, but, quote, I'm not supposed to reach that conclusion for another year.
Shit.
Like, it's clown time. It's so dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, God. But the thing is, like, they don't actually have to stigmatize it. And all they have to do is make it feel so farcical that Congress people won't do anything about it. It's actually a much lower bar than making people think. Like, you just have to make it pointless for them to complain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In 1969, the Condon Report was published. In his introduction, Condon wrote, quote, our general conclusion is that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge. Careful consideration of the record as it is available to us leads us to conclude that further extensive study of UFOs probably cannot be justified in the expectation that science will be advanced hereby.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like Kirkpatrick just like copy pasted this whole thing, like this whole strategy document and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Filmmaker James Fox, who we've talked about here before, tweeted, if you replace Dr. Condon with Dr. Kirkpatrick, history really does repeat itself.
I mean, yeah, when you pick someone to lead an organization specifically so that they will come to a conclusion and let them know what the conclusion is that you want them to come to, it's probably going to repeat a little bit.
Now, there's one other detail of the Condon Report that is aggravating.
Okay.
The introduction, written by Condon himself, is very dismissive. The report itself finds several of the cases credible. Like, the report itself, compiled by the scientist who was working under him, did not reach the conclusions that Condon did, but all the media heard and all they reported was Condon says no UFOs and it's not worth studying. Following the Condon report, the Air Force quickly shuttered Project Blue Book and ceased all public investigations into UFOs. The official statement for the next 50 years was that there was no scientific evidence for UFOs and reports should be made to your local police department instead.
Yeah, nothing to see here. Everyone move along.
Right. So all of that is to say, this is why, frankly, this is why we started the podcast. Like, this is why the 2017 New York Times article about the ATIP program, the secret UFO investigation project that was happening off the books, was so shocking. The UFO investigations never stopped, despite the government's very loud proclamation that there was nothing to see here. They just went dark.
That's crazy. So that, I don't know, this context really does make it feel like the latest report was just a foregone conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, right? Like, it really looks like there have been these two warring contingents in the DoD who've been playing tug-of-war over this topic for 80 years. Yeah. So I wanted to make it clear, because here's the thing. I have no doubt there are members of our audience and in the broader world who have been kind of interested to come along with this, as long as nobody was explicitly saying it's nonsense. But now, hey, here's AARO. Here's a government body that was tasked with investigating this, coming out saying, we spent a year looking into it. They made a 63-page document, and it says there's no evidence and there never has been. I don't blame anyone for seeing that document and questioning.
Yeah.
Am I getting sucked down a rabbit hole? Is there nothing to this? I can't say for sure. I've been very clear with everybody, including Chuck, that I don't know if this is real.
Of course.
But there is a strong set of historical evidence that when the government publicly says there is nothing to see here, that is not how they treat it internally. They have repeatedly looked into this topic and found it at least compelling enough to keep investigating. And in many cases, overtly saying this is clearly extraterrestrial.
Right.
Is it extraterrestrial? Is it a secret U.S. program? I don't know. But I have a hard time taking the latest in an 80-year series of government denials seriously when we know that virtually every other time the government said there's nothing to see here, that was compromised by what they actually thought behind the closed doors.
Right. And it's so interesting thinking that that this could just be about intelligence analysts being overwhelmed by the number of reports and worrying about missing other things that are closer.
Isn't that fascinating? That is
super fascinating.
Them saying explicitly, I don't know if this is real or not, but if we keep letting people report it, we might miss a Russian missile. And that's why we should debunk it. Damn, So we've talked before that one possible interpretation of what's happening, and this is something that Tom DeLonge and the Wilson Memo supports, is the idea that, frankly, the government doesn't know a whole lot more than we do.
Sure.
And the one thing they have been able to conclude is they don't appear to be hostile because they've been here for 80 years, flying around, getting on our way. They've never shot anyone. They've never invaded. If they've got a game plan that's detrimental to us, it seems to be a long-term thing,
one.
So at least at the moment, I wouldn't blame any defense person for being like, calibrate the radar to filter out the harmless, insanely fast, wildly behaving devices, because the thing we're actually looking for is missiles and enemy jets. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I don't blame someone for getting to that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're like different purposes. We need two different sets of radar.
Yeah. Now, we've gone over the report itself, what it says. We've gone over the historical record and what it says and why it is in conflict with what AARO says. Because again, AARO looked at every single one of these investigations, and in every single one of them, they said the conclusion of the investigation was there is no evidence of extraterrestrial activity. Now,
I'm just imagining, was the investigation that they read the Condon report, was that like their homework? And they presented a summary of what Condon said?
Yeah. So let's get to the fun part, which is everybody's reactions over the last week, because there have been some juicy ones out there, Chuck. People have had some real bangers of opinions, but also hidden in those snarky reactions have been some genuine concerns that I may not have thought of as I read the report or thought about the historical.
Okay.
So first up, we got our old buddy, Representative Tim Burchett. When asked what he thought, he said, "So the people doing the cover-up say they find no cover-up. Classic self-fulfilled prophecy."
This guy, so fed up, but yeah.
Now, that said, this idea of the fox guarding the hen house is a concern that has been echoed by many people, including Chris Mellon. Now, I have a lot of quotes from a lot of people, and I couldn't include all of them, but Chris made the point that, if the DoD had investigated itself as a consequence of the Iran-Contra affair and found that nothing happened, we would have been rightly suspicious of that. The body that is being accused of misbehaving is the one conducting the investigation, and you should factor that in.
They should recuse themselves.
Yeah. Lieutenant Tim McMillan, who is obviously former military and also co-founder of the news agency The Debrief, said, basically, the report can be summed up: everyone AARO spoke with is telling the gospel truth, except for any whistleblowers. They're all lying or confused. AARO is committed to transparency and answering any questions about its investigative process, provided you're one of the few hand-picked journalists in an off-camera private setting.
That's so good.
Big Daddy Lou Elizondo, one of our favorites, former head of one of the government UFO investigation programs, ATIP, came out and said, today, AARO issued a public report that is intentionally dishonest, inaccurate, and dangerously misleading. I hold the Pentagon leadership and former AARO leadership. Oh, no. Sorry, a little pop-up just covered up what I was reading. I hold the Pentagon leadership and former AARO leadership accountable for this obvious attempt to diminish and embarrass whistleblowers, to undermine the truth, and ignore the evidence. Their goal is clearly to minimize congressional and public scrutiny and to cover up the truth.
Wow. That is really good. Intentionally dishonest is like such a killer phrase.
It is. Now, in case anybody out there is like bristling at intentionally dishonest, like, well, I don't know if they were lying. Okay. The debrief reporting on the report said several factual errors appear throughout the new report that, for some, potentially undermine the level of rigor that AARO appears to have applied to its investigations.
Like what kinds of errors?
They get Senator Harry Reid's home state wrong. They got the date of Kenneth Arnold's famous 1947 sighting wrong. They falsely claimed that Arnold described the craft he saw as saucer-like when that description was applied by the media. They got the name of one of the Air Force projects wrong. They got both the date and the conclusion of an Air Force study wrong, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention that, they've got 20 odd pages of citations at the end. A ton of them are just AARO case file. So there's no source for a lot of their claims. It's all self-referential.
Yeah. So like they all seem kind of minor, but like put them all together in one place and it makes the review process or the editing like feel a little questionable.
It's lazy is what it is. Like, the fact that they got a date wrong or, a senator's home state wrong does not call their overall conclusion into question. It may still be accurate. What it does call into question is their work ethic, frankly, and their review criteria. Like, how many people reviewed this? How many people edited it? It feels like basically no one. And if they're putting that little effort into basic intellectual rigor, it calls everything they're doing into question. I'm not saying everything's bogus because they got a date wrong, but it's worth considering. If you turned in a term paper like this, it would be rejected. If you are a journalist and you write an article like this, it would be rejected. We hold people to standards for a reason. And yes, these are minor mistakes, but there's a lot of them. And if you're making this many mistakes on unimportant shit, what sort of mistakes are you making on the important shit? Dr. Gary Nolan, who is the co-founder of the Soul Foundation. We talked about him a lot last episode. Chuck, you're going to love this one.
Okay.
They literally referenced a wiki fandom site as a source. Do you know what wiki fandom is used for? Like Lord of the Rings universe trilogies and video game wiki websites. I mean, that's in a government report. It's ridiculous. What that tells you is the lack of seriousness that they used to put this thing together and the lack of cross-checking that they were using to vet the source material for.
Fandom. That's rough. Like, even I struggle to use fandom.
And I'm not joking either. Like, that is literally, it's the third reference in the PDF. You can go look at it.
Serious?
Yes, dead serious.
Wow.
Chris Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, said, quote, AARO's inept historical report is pathetic. Anyone who has read even a few basic books about the history of UAP can see that. I believe not only neglects critical events, but also contains inaccuracies in other statements. For example, referring to them saying there were no NDAs, I am confident that many military personnel, such as the F-16 pilots in the famous Stevensville, Texas UAP case, have been compelled to sign NDAs concerning UAP. This report is prompting me and others to redouble our efforts to assist Congress and the public in learning the truth.
That's awesome. Go get him, Chris.
Right. He continues in another tweet. What I also find, right? Like, he tweeted like 3 times. I'm picturing him like reading it off, and he's a public speaker. He's good at like condensing what he says down into a public statement. And then he goes away and he's still mad. He comes back like, no, I got to write more about this.
Yeah, exactly.
What I also find concerning is the false conflation in some news coverage of the assertion there is no recovered alien technology with the notion that we don't have evidence of craft doing things beyond our present understanding of science and technology. As we know, hundreds of credible military reports remain unexplained and are continuing to pour in. Even Dr. Kirkpatrick concedes there is no conventional explanation for the well-documented Nimitz case.
Yeah. Yeah. Carl Sagan says, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Sagar Enjeti, and boy, I apologize if I fucked up that name, bro, who is the co-host of Breaking Points, said, the idea that an agency that has been unable to pass its own audit for 5 years can effectively now audit all of its historical programs going back to 1945 and claim any sort of legitimacy in the eye of the public is totally ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, what is this about failing audits?
So the Pentagon has failed an independent audit of its accounting systems for 6 years in a row. It was the last U.S. government agency to be required to pass an audit, and it is the last one that has never passed it. Now, to be fair, the Defense Department has something like $8 trillion to account for, but the point stands. If you can't pass an accounting audit, why would you expect us to believe that you can make a thorough 80-year audit of your historical programs? Like,
yeah, I was like, I wonder if NASA's passed their audits, and apparently, according to GPT, so it could be totally wrong, but apparently, not only has NASA been successful in its audits, it's received the highest possible audit opinion, which is pretty awesome. Good for them. It always makes me happy to hear like a good organization as a counterpoint.
All right. So, Chuck, I saved the best for last. I actually debated about which one to save for last. I thought about ending on the fandom wiki.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
But this is also from Dr. Gary Nolan. He says, quote, my sources inside of AARO tell me that there was a lot of pressure to rush this report out with preconceived conclusions, and that folks on the inside were unhappy with the narrative being pushed. And the ODNI was also unpleased at this point and opposed it coming out because they were not given the chance to vet this in the way they thought it should have been.
Wow. Remind me who ODNI is?
The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who, among other things, oversee AARO.
Okay, so
if you go
their
look
boss wasn't happy.
Yeah, if you go look at every previous document that AARO has put out, it very prominently says ODNI on it and has ODNI's logo. This report does not and is hosted on a different website. All the other ones were hosted on the ODNI's website. This one's hosted on AARO's.
Suspicious. Interesting.
Liberation Times wrote a whole article about this, which is one of the reasons I'm glad that we didn't rush our reporting on this, because this news just broke a day or two ago. Liberation Times said, quote, sources have indicated that the ODNI is hesitant to publicly support the report, fearing that it might compromise an investigation conducted by the intelligence community's Inspector General. This investigation is examining assertions by David Grush, a former top intelligence officer who testified under oath about the existence of illegal UAP programs involved in retrieving and reverse engineering non-human technology.
Yeah, and ICIG was the one that said Grush's claims were credible and urgent, right?
Yep. Awkward.
Awkward.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Okay, so I hope everyone forgives me for taking an hour to say this report is not good, and there's a reason you should not trust the government when they say they have found no evidence of extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things, like, it's so easy to assume that you're slipping down the conspiracy rabbit hole. Like, well, of course the government is going to lie to you. You can't trust anything they say. No, there is a documented historical record of the government lying to you on this exact topic many, many times over 80 years. This is, as a famous leader of our country once said, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, I can't be fooled again.
Yeah. I mean, it's even in the conclusion. Like, there are serious weasel words in there. Mm-hmm. And that's just super suspicious.
Yeah. I do kind of wonder if volume 2 comes out and they're like, so we talked to these like nuclear guys and there's something to it. Like, these UFOs were shutting down nukes. And also, have you guys seen this Tic Tac video? I don't know what's up with that.
It was real good. You should go watch it.
I know a year ago we told you this was all bullshit, but dude.
Yeah. I mean, that would be awesome. Let's go for that.
Awesome.
But
and therefore I do not want it to happen.
No, of course not. But would volume 2 be called Grudge? That's what I want to know.
It should be called More Bullshit Heaped on Top of the Original Bullshit. All right. Yep. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our social media accounts.
And you can feel free to email us at Scott or Chuck at veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show or see our extra content, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.